So welcome everybody to our first episode of the Go Wild Avian Nutrition Podcast. I'm Jason Crean, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Evie Voltura.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you.
So we have talked a long time about, I guess you would say our frustration, right? Around the
Yeah,
myth
just
of bird nutrition.
yeah, and just conversations that we feel like other people should have a chance to listen in on and see what kind of things we're talking about. Yeah, just general like ups and downs of being in the world of having expertise in the realm of avian nutrition, for sure.
Yeah. And seeing what easily circulates online and the myths that we do our best to bust when we can. Um, it's a challenge, but when we talk, it's never just a 10-minute conversation, right? It's always,
Ever.
yeah, it goes on forever. So we thought we would launch this podcast as another educational tool for you to participate in and listen to. And hopefully, this is beneficial for everyone. We wanted to share what the goals for this podcast would be. We're hoping that it will be monthly, around the same time, middle of the month, on an evening that we offer it live. And then it'll be recorded for everybody to watch at a later date. So our mission is that we want to really talk about nutrition from a holistic standpoint. People tend to look at nutrition and hyper focus on certain things. I think the last thing we talked about, Evie, was sugar in fruit. Like fruit has a ton of nutrients, right? But people
Right.
tend to zero in on sugar and say, "Oh, sugar's the devil. No, we can't feed any sugar." And then ignoring all the other things that it could present, right?
Mhm.
So we wanted to kind of zoom out and look at holistic nutrition for birds and what the science is behind these things. Evie recently published a paper which is amazing on alternative foodstuffs, and she looked at, I can't say all the research, right? I'm not allowed to say all, but
I mean, I looked at it as much as I could.
tons and tons of published research on what we have seen directly observed parrots consuming in the wild. And the list is long. And it just once again supports what Evie and I both perpetuate online as the ultimate in feeding is a diverse diet and making sure that parrots have access to all kinds of taste, textures, things like that, because that's what they've evolved to do. Um, and so that's basically what the mission is. Um, and then busting those myths that are so common. I think every time I show a picture of sunflower seeds in a talk, I get somebody in the audience that's angry, and it's like sunflower seeds are incredibly nutritious.
Yeah.
A few every day for most birds is great, it's fine, but feeding a bowl full of them is problematic, which a lot of people did decades ago. Um, and we know better. So those are the types of things that our mission includes. And then,
And I
yeah,
would
go ahead.
add that the goal is that we're constantly learning new things about these birds and what they eat and what they need. And the goal is a never ending version of when I knew better, I did better. And so that's I think what we really want to be able to share is how we can do better without waffling between extremes.
Yeah, and I think one of the most dangerous things we see in on social media is everyone has an opinion and they state it as fact.
Mm.
When in essence, most people have heard it or read it one time, accepted it as fact without any evidence, and now are perpetuating it. which is most things on social media, right? It's not just bird nutrition, it's most things. Like I heard this about this politician, and I heard, like, I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. So we want to provide this so that it can be shared and hopefully educate people, um, and give them a little bit more evidence as to why they should be feeding what they should be feeding. Um, the vision. We want to improve the lives of birds. This is what both of us, why both of us are in research, why both of us are doing what we do when it comes to educating the public. It's to improve the lives of birds, because in captivity and managed situations like our homes, we can do so much better and then just survival. And so we really want to work towards that. And I know, Evie, you just did a talk for the Association of Avian Veterinarians on that. It's not just about surviving, it should be about thriving, which is, something I have used, my phrase that I've used forever, along with Dr. Becker and other people who really preach the whole holistic, really zooming out and looking at holistic nutrition for animals in general. Um, and we want to do that through enhancing and enriching the avian diet. And so we're going to talk about those types of things. Both of us have backgrounds in science, and so we know how why parrots look the way they do, why parrots, the species do what they do. And it's because it works, and nature has selected those traits that they use, and we need to make sure they're using those traits, their beaks, their feet, that massive muscular tongue of theirs, like how to use these things to enrich their lives and keep them as far away from just surviving as possible. We want them to be thriving every day. So that's the goal. And we're hoping that, we can make this happen through our conversations that we have on the podcast. So I want to turn it over to Evie. Dr. Evie can introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Crean, for getting this all started and getting everything started, not just this project, but lots of things. So my name is Dr. Evie Voltura. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at Texas A&M. I work with the Schubot Center for Avian Health, which in the past has primarily involved parrots, but has since expanded to avian health and conservation, and also human health with the new director, Dr. Sarah Hamer. Just a bit about my educational background. I did my undergrad at the University of Oregon. I got my degree in environmental science with a focus on life science. And then I did my PhD on parrot health and conservation. My work had a strong focus on parrot nutrition and dietary habits, using everything from reviewing the literature and images to actual diet manipulations, looking at things like the elemental compositions of eggshells and how diet might affect those variables. So my current work is related to exploring how diet and nutrition really affect different aspects of the health of birds. And there's a lot we know, but there's a lot we're learning. And I think that's one of the things I'd also really like to say, that my goal for this is, in relation to myths being spread, is helping you guys understand what is known, what can be inferred, and what we still need to learn, so that you guys can take new, if you hear new, what is purported to be information or knowledge, you can consider various different angles to understand better whether or not that may be valid and true information or knowledge. So that's was a long-winded. Oh, I've been interested in parrots since I was 10 or 11. So I've been at this for almost 30 years.
Thank you for that. And for those of you that don't know me, I think everybody probably does if you're on Team Thrive. But for those of you who are watching this after that may not know me, my name is Jason Crean. I have 2 degrees in biology, 2 degrees in learning, and both of those come in very handy when it comes to avian nutrition. I love having my foot in both animal nutrition, biology, and research, as well as education. I specifically studied adult learning, so when I see these things online, it really comes down to my expertise on how we as adults learn and take things for granted online. And that's one of the reasons why we started this podcast. I currently all of my jobs right now are centered on science and science education. I teach 300 level courses like evolution, and some other things like animal nutrition and zoo biology at St. Xavier University in Chicago. Though my aviary, and I should say aviaries, with our birds that are all potential research subjects so that we can study their diets and their resulting health from those diets, are down here in Orlando, Florida, where I get to spend most of my time. So I have a really, really nice job situation, I guess you could say.
Everybody's jealous.
I get I help direct the university's animal nutrition lab. We are still in grant funding and funding mode, generating funds mode. And for those of you that have shopped biobirdblends.com, that money helps us greatly, to kind of move closer and closer to what we want to do. We've done preliminary research on processed pellets and inflammatory compounds that are associated with those. We've also done initial microbiome work on birds that are consuming whole food diets versus processed diets to see what kind of diversification of the microbiome exists. So those things will be coming, that research will be coming along sooner or later. Evie knows how difficult funding and publication is, and getting anyone to agree on anything.
Yes,
Becomes,
absolutely. And that's another interest we share is how diet affects the microbiome. So we're excited
yeah.
to look at those things, and is a fascinating area of a diagnostic to look at, that owners can, I think now, even submit microbiome stuff and through their vet or not, and just take a look at what their bird's microbiome is doing and how it's changing. So I'm excited for that.
And we're still learning. I remember spending a summer with microbiome scientists a few years back and talking to them about like sprouting, for example. Like there's a lot of hype around, oh, sprouts are dangerous and all this sort of thing, and they're like, if you're using any kind of like microbial, antimicrobial agent, they're like, what's the difference? It's like it's produce, right? Like you wash your
Right.
produce, don't you? And even around, and when I talked to them, they were like, well, the research is pretty clear on what to wash your produce in. It's baking soda. Like most
Mhm.
people think you have to acidify the water with vinegar, but no, it's just baking soda. Baking soda gets rid of like 99% of pesticides and fungicides and all that sort of thing. And combining that with scrubbing, light scrubbing of produce, even better. But those sorts of things just tend not to get out there. And I see a
Mm.
lot of like, oh, apple cider vinegar cures everything. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it doesn't. I run the bacterial plates in the lab. It does nothing. So those are the types of conversations that we have. And between my work with helping people improve the lives of their pets, but also zoos and consulting
Yes.
on nutrition. Um, I get to see a wide range of problems that we can work towards collaborating to solve. I just worked with a zoo on their um, toucan diets, and we're seeing benefits when we took them off of a lot of processed foods that were supposedly formulated for them. It's
Right.
it's scary business. So those are the types of things that we want to talk about during the podcast. So we thought we would keep it light and just kind of give an overview of things that we consider when we're talking about avian nutrition. And most of you know that nutrition isn't just about nutrients. It's also about how they use these foods and how they use their behavior, their naturalistic behaviors to access these foods. So basic needs versus enrichment, and we want to get as close to thriving as possible all the time.
Yeah. And I think um it's so interesting. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is our nutrition studies are limited in parrots that involve parrots specifically, but oftentimes nutrition studies focus on basic minimum requirements. So what we're um, interested in with this diversification of the diet is a way to cover a lot of things that we can infer based on what wild parrots consume. Um, and we don't necessarily have every detail about what's going on with each of those foodstuffs that they eat, but we can learn about like what compounds are in the plant, different parts of the plant tissue, the form of something like a geophagy substrate or wood or charcoal or sap. Like there's all these different um, things that can fill in gaps that allow us to effectively address um, the what Dr. Crean is talking about, which is moving just beyond, beyond the model of survival. So I think, what do you think that we've kind of gone from less than survival with like sunflower seeds to we're gotten decently good at survival, but really the thriving is where we're trying to go or
Mhm.
where we'd like to go. And um, I wanted to add that in term we're when we mean like we're interested in all birds, um, we also I think of also of wild birds. So a lot of birds are struggling in the wild, and many require captive management at various stages. So in the past, the model has been kind of, oh, feed them dog food or some other monkey pellets or something like that. When that really does not prepare them well for life in the wild. So that is another interest of mine, and I'm sure yours too, is kind of similar to the zoo mentality. Um, how we can get this information out there effectively. So what do you think, considering the cost of running studies, um, and all the ethics involved with doing this kind of work, the time and the energy and the cost of publishing stuff where it's not as a lot of what has been done is not publicly available. Either companies have hidden results behind closed doors or publications are paywalled. So what do
Yeah,
you see?
and that goes for dog food, cat food, like all of
Mhm.
those processed foods. Those companies don't have to share what they do. They just have to be able to tell you that we can keep animals alive for this amount of time, so our food
Right.
must be good.
Right.
And
Right.
we have to do better than that.
Yeah.
And the more birds I see plucking, I'm like, we haven't solved a lot of problems because I've seen just as many birds plucking or self-mutilating that I did
Mhm.
in the 90s. Like it's still pervasive.
Well,
And
and
a
that,
lot of that has to do with diet. I know it's a combination of things often, but I mean, if you don't have a foundation of
yes.
nutrition, it's everything else is going to fall behind after.
And I think that's a really good segue into zoopharmacognosy, which is a fancy
I'm
word
glad you say
for,
that word because I butcher that word, zoofarm. We
yeah,
just
let's
call it
call it zoo. You can call it
zoofarm.
zoo farm. Most of you have probably heard of this in some form in the animal kingdom, but it's often described as a type of self-medication in animals. But when you hear self-medication, you tend to think of something to like cure an illness or a disease, like whatever it is. Maybe some people have heard of like the great apes putting salves on infected wounds. So that's like a classic example of zoo farm. But zoo farm can also um, involve behaviors that are meant to help stave off health issues. They don't have to be diseases per se, but things, there's a whole lot of different things, but ingesting various substances to, let's say, some plants, like leaves and stuff may have higher levels of phytochemicals or whatever, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about later in more detail. Um, but that have medicinal properties in the sense that they're you know, they are antimicrobial or anti-parasitic or like all these different things. But they can, you can help an upset stomach with some of these foodstuffs. There are so many different things. I'm way oversimplifying this, but the part of a lack of diversity in a parrot's or bird's diet. Sorry, I will always say parrot because parrots are like my big thing, but I am interested in more than that. Um, but a lot of the lack of diversity is not just like plant species. It's lots of different types of food, like some of the ones that I mentioned earlier that you may not think of as a traditional parrot food or bird food. In the case of parrots, it would be the reproductive parts of plants. But there's a lot of other, besides nutrients, there's, textural differences, and a lot of different compounds or physical structure of what they're ingesting that can affect their health, particularly from the inside out. And there's a lot of that stuff that parrots eat in the wild, which I will say as a caveat, there's you need to reach out to somebody if you're going to feed your bird something that you can't find record of birds eating. You should understand uh well, we can go into more detail about that later, but uh I forgot where I was going with that because I just got nervous.
You're among friends.
um but anyway, so a lot of these things are lacking in our birds' diets, and I think a lot of our conversation has been expanding upon the idea of why diversification is so important and what diversification means, and what diversification can do. So these three major points we have up here, there's nutrients. So on the survival end, we have a reasonable understanding of basic needs, but subtleties and the smaller nutrients we're still for all animals, as humans too, right? If you think about it, um, diversification can fill in some of those gaps that we may not be covering in the survive aspect of what we're providing. So what do you think, Dr. Crean?
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about zoo farm, the first thing that always comes to mind when I hear that is dogs eating grass, right? Like
Yeah.
we all grew up, and if our dog was sick, they went out and ate grass. And grass, obviously, dogs are not grazers, right? They're carnivores, and they're not grazing on grass as a diet, right? They don't eat that when they. However, and this is one thing that I really picked up from those microbiome scientists is that fiber feeds a
Mhm.
microbiome.
Yep.
And
Oh, good
they
point. Yeah.
talked about all these different species and how it all came down to fiber in some form for a lot. And so when I think about parrots, and I remember having a talk with Dr. Becker years ago, and she was like, I had a bird that was regurgitating, I believe it was at the time, and it was someone else's bird that didn't want it anymore, and it came to me with all these issues. And normally I can change up their diet, and they're thriving pretty quickly. But of course, it was a neglectus. It's just that's.
Yes. That's the answer.
Um, and she said, I don't want to medicate this bird because we don't really know what's going on here. She said, so I want you to give it fermented veggies. And I said, well, that's an interesting recommendation. She goes, what I have found in my patients, and she had 15,000 active clients, so she had a huge data set. She said, when people come to me with parrots and I put them on fermented veggies, she's like, they devour them.
Mm,
Like when they need them, they devour them. Like it's very clear that
yeah.
something like this is going on, which makes sense. I mean, there's plenty, and fermented doesn't mean they're getting drunk on berries, like some lorikeets have been known to do. Fermented means, they eat a lot of rotting fruits and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Um, it's just part of the rain. It's part of living in a forest,
Mhm.
And sure enough, that turned him around within a week. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that has to do with the microbiome, giving them
Oh,
those
absolutely.
fermented foods. Yeah, help seed, kind of provide bacteria to the system that are
Mhm.
going to be beneficial. And it's an easy thing to do. And
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, like ferment your own veggies and offer them here and there, and your bird will thank you for it, like
Yeah.
with no
For
vet
sure.
bills. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot, I think there's a lot that could be said. And I know like you and I have talked a lot about your ideas around geophagy, and
Yeah.
geophagy is the consuming of
Earth and
mineral, earth
earth
and
and
mineral,
materials.
earth and
I'm
materials.
having an argument with the reviewer about what geophagy is, and it's earthen materials,
Yeah.
which can range from your soils to your minerals. So it can be, yeah, it's and earth, water is technically a type of earthen material, but if you're drinking water for thirst, that's not really geophagy. Whereas that is if you were drinking a mineral water for the purpose of targeting the minerals, which are the earthen material, that is an aqueous geophagy. So, um, but you bring up a really good point because I don't know if we've talked about this before, but why do birds pick paint off their cages? I think it's because they don't have the ability to engage in geophagy, and that's the closest they can get. I mean, it can be boredom and things like that, but so many of them do it,
Well,
and
and
that
even
behavior.
even them eating wood, even them actually consuming the wood in their toys, right? And I've had
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
freak out about that. They're like, "Oh my God, I think my bird ate some wood out of its toy." I'm like, it's an organic material.
Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah.
Um, and there's a
Charcoal is
reason. Sorry,
charcoal is
charcoal.
something that they consume
Well,
that surprises people.
most people know that birds are visiting clay licks in South America, and grazing in soil, if they're like African grays, kicking things up and eating,
Mhm.
grazing on the ground, and cockatoos we see do it all the time. You know, all of that, there, like Laura Joseph said, there's a reason for every behavior, right? If they're doing something,
Mhm.
there's a reason for it. And it was funny because when that research came out, that said parrots were visiting the clay licks not for detoxing, but for sodium, to gain sodium.
Mhm.
Everybody then said, "Oh, see, they don't detox," and it's like, well, no, that could be a byproduct.
No, it is. Yes,
Yes, but it
exactly.
doesn't mean that that's like they're not. They may not be going to detox. They may be going because they have
Yeah.
a taste for sodium and they need some sodium in their diet.
Or
But the
or that they
detox is a
don't.
benefit.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
but
ahead.
but also I'm sure that they like have time because so with the case of South American geophagy on the clay licks, um, they engage in geophagy to some extent throughout the year, but it's primarily during the breeding season, and we'll have a separate lecture on geophagy entirely. But they do go, so they go mostly during the breeding season, and but they do go during the year, and they do visit smaller little clay licks that may or may not have the nutrients that we think they're targeting in those. In that particular instance, sodium deficiency is probably the driver. I think there's other elements involved, and there's costs involved, which are interesting. But there's no reason to say that parrots don't or birds don't go consume clay for detoxification because we know that it can be a detoxifier. So maybe when they're going when it's not breeding time to these other little clay licks, they absolutely could be going for detox. So that's yeah, that's important to realize.
Yeah, it's that same danger on social media. You hear a soundbite and it gets spread. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, this definitely has those benefits. And it could be in some species, it could be that the birds who were going to clay licks for sodium lived longer and passed on their genes more because they had the detoxification effect, right? So it may
Yeah.
be indirect, but that may be an adaptation, and
Oh,
those
absolutely.
birds survived and had more babies, and that became more popular. That gene became more prevalent
Yeah.
in the population. That's the basics of natural selection. Like if they're
Right.
doing something that is increasing their fitness as an individual, as in a population, then those individuals will pass on their genes. They'll have more
Yeah.
babies, and they'll have more babies, and then those genes just become more common. So,
Yeah.
if there's a benefit, whether direct or indirect,
Yes.
that behavior is going to get passed on. And
Yeah,
so,
agreed.
it's that basic idea that, and what most people don't understand is that parrots eat a lot of toxic things in the wild, right? Like they eat a lot of things that plants protect themselves so that
Yeah.
organisms don't over consume them. And
Hmm.
even though they want their seeds, trees want their seeds spread because they can't move. So they need somebody to move their seeds. And
Most of them can't move.
most of them, yes, well, they can't get up and walk and spread their offspring elsewhere. Let's just say that if you see a tree do that, you need to seek professional help.
I thought
But
it was the Brazilian walking tree does that.
don't spread that. Everyone's going to be Googling that now. But yeah, that idea of like and it's the same thing with primates, for example. Like they can only consume so much of one thing, and then they got to move on to the next because they just can't
Yeah.
handle the toxin loads. Um, and it's funny to me to listen to people go, "Oh my God, I heard sunflower seeds are toxic," and I'm like, "They're not toxic. They're just like they're just fine. Just a few of them is fine. Don't feed it to a bowl full of them." But with nutrition, what I have found is I have to be pretty black and white with the information I provide because
Absolutely.
a lot of pet owners love their pets, like Robin Schwokas Sullivan says food is love, right? So we tend to want to love our animals to death, literally to
Yeah.
death, and give them a lot of stuff. So and Dr. Becker had told me this, and it stuck with me. She's like, in our culture, if a little is good, a lot must be better, and
Yes.
that's the problem, right? So
Right.
yes, walnuts are wonderful, but your bird doesn't need 16 walnuts a day. Um, but a walnut
Yeah,
a day
yeah,
is
yeah.
the better way, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's important to remember for all things when it comes to feeding parrots or well, birds in general. Well, unless you're a super specialist like a hummingbird. Okay, that's different. But understanding, yeah, what are sort of the acceptable limits of what you can feed something that is either, what we see is good and could potentially be fed in abundance doesn't mean it should be fed in abundance, and something that um, could be classified as toxic and should be fed in small amounts if fed doesn't mean that you shouldn't feed them. You just need it gets this, and this is where it gets complicated um of what's black and white. So I mean, I would say unless you're under the guidance of somebody who has a good amount of expertise in these areas, be careful, I guess, is
Yeah.
what is that the best way to say it? Because like
Yeah.
go wild, but be careful.
In it, when in doubt, you know, consult a trusted source or don't feed it. I, I get a lot of questions about avocado, like tons of questions about avocado. And somebody had just contacted me and they said, but I see the parrot, they live in Southern California. They're like, we have parrots that eat the avocados right off of our tree.
Right.
And I said, that's it. That's the point.
Yeah.
When avocados ripen on the tree, the toxin recedes from the flesh. It's not in the flesh.
Yeah.
But we pick them and put them in grocery stores before they've had a chance to ripen to increase their shelf life so that they're not brown by the time they get there.
Mm.
So we can't feed avocados to our parrots. And they said, well, can I feed the ones off my tree? I said, I'm not going to tell you to do that
Yeah.
because you can't tell when it's officially ripe enough
Yeah.
to feed. So just don't do it. Now,
Yeah.
zoos have been feeding avocados to non-parrots for
Mhm.
decades. They'll take
Right.
half of an avocado, they'll stick it. You may have seen it at your local zoo. They'll stick it on a spike in the middle,
Yeah.
and the tanagers and stuff fly over, and there's little beak marks in it, and they're fine. So it seems like parrots and even some, I would even say some parrots more than others
Yes.
have a real sensitivity to it.
Yeah.
So I will never say that you can feed avocado to a bird. It just isn't
Same.
that parrot. It's just not worth the risk. And it's a
Yeah.
shame too, because avocados are so incredibly nutritious. But uh,
Yeah.
if you're anyone listening to this, you should even eat an avocado. Just don't feed it to your birds.
Exactly. And that means none. That
Yeah,
is a one, that is a none.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny because people like, do you have is there a list of produce? And I'm like, it's almost everything at the grocery store. Almost everything is just fine. Um, like when you look at the greens, it's like everything. Like everything is pretty much okay as long as you're not only feeding that or feeding a huge amount of any one thing, you know?
Yeah.
So it's more about like the handful of things that just aren't the best. But when I talk to people who are international, um, feeding garlic to birds is very common every place else.
Right.
But here it has a huge stigma. And no one's feeding like a whole clump of garlic to their birds every day. But a lot of people have used it with aviary birds as,
Hmm.
natural to kind of stave off parasites and things like that,
Hmm.
um, with no problems. But it's that idea that these things are toxic and deadly and they'll kill your bird in 5 minutes and you should never feed them. Like these people that perpetuate this stuff online, you have to be very wary of because people state things as fact.
Yeah.
And somebody just posted something about grapes and I was like, grapes are okay. Oh, I heard they were, toxic. And I'm like,
Oh
grapes,
gosh.
grapes have lots of benefits.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I
someone
mean,
said that
don't give them all grapes, but
right,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
But calling them
Exactly. Well, they
toxic.
shouldn't have anything all. They should, yeah, they should definitely have diversified diets, but it's like grapes, especially darker grapes, have a lot of benefits, and people will cry about the sugar, and I'm like, they'd have to eat a lot of grapes to have some kind of sugar issue, and then
Yeah.
I've had people tell me, oh, well, my bird gets really aggressive when it has grapes. And I'm like, uh, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know about that.
There's a lot of interesting anecdotal stuff that comes
Yeah.
through. In regards to some of the things that people seem to perceive as toxic that seem unusual, um, I see a pattern in they're toxic to either dogs or cats, and
Yeah.
therefore there is this mentality that if that's not okay for them. I think the garlic thing, I want to say hemolytic anemia, like dogs can now have onions or garlic, and maybe it's like one of those things just
I
has
think
been,
an overabundance of that can cause
yeah,
that. But once again, don't feed your dog cloves of garlic. But somebody
right.
just said dogs, like avocado's toxic to dogs. I'm like, no, no, it's not. Avocado's fine for dogs. They shouldn't have probably a whole avocado.
Uh,
It's a lot of fat, but you
but you
know,
see these overlaps of like, oh,
yeah.
it's toxic for one thing, so thus it's become
Well, yeah,
toxic.
because dogs have a specific reaction with something in grapes and raisins that
Yes, yeah, yeah,
cause can cause illness and death. But that's a specific biochemical problem that has been identified.
right,
You
exactly.
do not see in I mean, parrots are not dropping dead because they've had grapes. It's
I mean,
like
if you have a
not.
dog and your parrot likes to feed your dog, I would recommend you
Careful.
don't offer them grapes.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. That's definitely good advice. So all of these things that we're talking about that we see um, can be satisfied with diversity. And when we talk to people um, like Dr. Jamie Abedi, who's an avian vet in the Chicago area, we'll have her on the show. She's had birds, and she also, like you and me, she's had birds since she was a kid. Um, I first met her when I believe she was in high school, and she was breeding the most beautiful lovebirds I had ever seen. I mean, just
Oh,
really,
wow.
really. So she's got a plethora of experience and information. And when she talks about diet, she's like, the you know it may say vitamin A on the bag, but these birds
Yeah,
still have vitamin A problems.
yeah,
And she goes, they need produce, they need a diverse,
yeah,
whole food diet to get beta carotenes and things like that. So
yeah,
that diversity is really important. And when we talk about biodiversity, that means the organic matter that they're consuming, which is basically what we've been talking about. And you mentioned reproductive parts of plants. A lot of people don't realize that fruit is a reproductive part of a plant. It's an ovary. And I remember teaching that to students who would then look at me and go, a fruit is an ovary. So we're eating an ovary. And I'm like, yeah, that's what a fruit is. Fruit is an ovary.
I hate to break it to
That's the actual term. And it's
you.
full of little fertilized,
Ah,
eggs
now
called seeds.
you just gave them an excuse to not eat their fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, they need to get over that. So, the typical foodstuffs are, seeds, nuts, fruits, flowers, buds. Those are all very common staple foods in parrot diets around the world. Like we see them eat those very commonly. Um, and those are what usually make up a large part of the diet in most people's cases. And we're trying to diversify beyond that to offer different things that have different colors, tastes, textures, things of that nature. But plants use those things to get animals to do the work for them. So a plant doesn't want to just drop all of its seeds around its base because then they're going to grow up in the shade and they're not going to survive. If it Plants need to pass on their genes through their seeds, they need to lure animals to do it for them. So it could be that they're going to have bright colored flowers that are going to draw pollinators and spread pollen, which are in essence sperm cells that have, half the genetic material to another flower that then will get fertilized and that'll become a seed within a fruit, which is the ovary. And if plants don't have those lures, then they don't have a way to get their genes out, spread all over. Some plants use other methods like wind. If you've ever had a dandelion in your yard and you've blown the seeds, that's one way that those things get spread. But a lot of plants need animals to spread their genes around. And that's why animals like parrots have adapted to be eating these reproductive parts of plants. And then alternate foodstuffs.
And then alternate food stuff.
Dr. Evie's favorite topic.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a lot of what we talked about this evening already,
Yeah.
which was, we have seen them eat wood in the wild. We have seen them eat bark. We have seen them eat mushrooms off the side of trees. I've shared a video of two macaws doing that, and I thought the torches and pitchforks were going to come out because how dare I share this horrible information? I'm like, they literally eat these things. They're eating them. And the video, it's not like that's not even good enough evidence, because everybody's afraid of mushrooms. And I'm like, we're not feeding them poisonous mushroom. We're feeding them culinary mushrooms that are made for eating. Insects like mealworms. Huge benefit. And when you look at the research, leaving mealworms in the sun for short periods of time, they produce their own vitamin D3, which then can travel up the food chain. So it's a great way to get your bird what they need. Same thing with mushrooms. You can put mushrooms in the sun and they can create a form of vitamin D as well. Foliage, so leaves. And what was it in your paper? It was 90% or plus, right, of parrots that have been seen eating foliage?
Yeah, I think it was 90, I want to say 97%. It was a really high in a really high rate of detection of consuming foliage, which is another good example of something we often don't cover, maybe in like leafy greens and things like that, but often types of foliage I would consider to be non-wild, which is what they're targeting. So, looking at, apple tree leaves or bamboo or things that aren't cultivated necessarily for human consumption, but we know parrots will eat, can eat them and get benefit from them, is a great place to start with that particular group of foodstuffs.
Yeah, and we'll have people who've been out in the wild and seen these things, like Bonnie Zimmerman, who runs Indonesian Parrot Project, will be on an upcoming episode of this podcast. And I just love her. She's such a hoot. But talking to her about like, what do you see? Because I remember saying, oh yeah, I had this person attack me because I recommended feeding mealworms to parrots. And she's like, we literally watch these birds pick larvae out of tree bark. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it happens.
yeah.
And there's reasons for that. So, and because that was invertebrates was a major category in that paper as well.
And that was another common one, common
Yeah,
detection.
very common. And then inorganic, which we talked about, geophagy, clays, soils, minerals, things like that. And you and I have been talking about putting together a mix that people could get for their parrots where they could engage in that naturalistic behavior. So stay tuned. You'll be the first to know about that if you're watching
I'm
this.
excited. Yes.
Yeah, it's time.
It's
So yeah,
time.
these are all the things that we're recommending. If you have questions and you're on the live chat here, feel free to put them in the chat now. Anything else you want to add to the list here, Dr. Evie?
I know. I think we covered a lot of the basic things we want to talk about. I had ideas for people to reach out to include like an ecotoxicologist would be really exciting to have so they can tell us more about some of the plants that we commonly see parrots eating in the wild besides avocado that or it doesn't have to be fruit. It could be the alternate foodstuffs too. We can talk about, what why would more about the details of what other things they could be getting zoo farm wise out of eating some of these things. I think that would be good.
Yeah, I've always referred to it as a biological arms race.
Yes.
And basically, it's called coevolution.
Hmm.
And um, what we find is that if a plant evolves to develop a toxin, the organisms that are eating it develop a way around avoiding the toxin or not, or becoming immune to the toxin, for example. There's a famous example of a snake and a salamander, and the salamander was toxic, so the snake couldn't eat it. But then this species of snake evolved to
Adapted
where
to,
they were
yeah.
immune to the toxin. I think it was TTX toxin. And like that's a great example of coevolution. Milkweed, like we know most animals can't eat milkweed, but the monarch butterfly is almost exclusively because it's evolved to eat,
Hmm.
consume that plant and its products. So this coevolution, like we need to learn so much more about how parrots have co-evolved, but
Yeah.
it's going to be limited to that species, right? Like not all the species will all be how do I say it? Will all be immune to certain toxins. Like we don't
Right.
know, right? That's a lot of what we don't know. And I know that some vets have said, when I've interviewed them, have said, well, cockatoos seem to have a real sensitivity to the avocado poisoning.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Makes sense. It makes
Yeah,
sense because they're
yeah,
not from that's a plant that's
yeah,
typically North and South America. So
yeah, and that's
um
a great caution that I go by too, is that if a plant-based food that you're looking at comes from a totally different geographic region where there's a totally different taxonomic groups of parrots, um, I would consider that to be a high relative, moderate to high caution, unless it's been documented to be safe some other way.
right.
So it's yeah, it's possible that that avocado thing was further um
Perpetuated.
perpetuated because of Australasian parrots
Yeah.
reacting negatively to that. So
Yeah, and you have to wonder about those zoo birds that I was talking about, like little tanagers and stuff that can eat avocado without any problem. So they may have evolved, to combat that and not
but yeah, I would ask, are they New World or Old World tanagers?
a new world.
So that would make sense that
Yeah,
they can tolerate them. That fits our
exactly.
model.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And the more we see, the more we learn. And this is, I mean, we will always be learning more about avian nutrition.
Mhm.
Um, because learning should never stop. Learning,
Absolutely.
it's we will perpetuate that learning forever.
Mhm.
um, and that benefits everybody. So
That's the
any
only
any
hill. That's
questions?
the only hill we'll die on is learning
Yes.
is forever.
Yeah, because there's plenty of people online that don't think they need to learn anything anymore. And that just ends up hurting the birds.
Yep.
So any questions from those of you that are live?
I like questions. I'm so excited when people engage. Just to make sure, can I ask Sarah? You're not my boss, Sarah, are you? Okay. Thanks. It would be fine if it was. I just like it's,
Yeah, this is the only members of Team Thrive are permitted on the live podcast. So
well, it is possible. I haven't checked.
okay.
He's a member, so I didn't know.
Well,
Oh,
if there's
there's
no
some
questions,
chat
sorry.
question. Oh no. Ha. Sorry. I was just checking the chat.
Yeah. So if there's no questions, we will close out. It's just about an hour, which is good timing. So we appreciate all of you being on. Stefania asked, could you elaborate on geophagy, how our cage parrots might, I think she means might use that.
Yeah. So
And
geophy,
we'll probably do a
yeah,
whole episode on this. So
yeah.
just so you're aware.
Would it satisfy you if I said we are actively working on developing a product that you can offer your parrot as a means um to participate in geophagy? Oh yeah. That read the whole thing. How our cage minerals might have minerals, etc. available.
Yeah, so
Uh
that what we're trying to develop something that where parents could take advantage of that and engage in that
yes.
behavior.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, please we'll keep you posted and check back. I will try to make a note so that or Jason, if we can have notes for like people who are interested, Dr. Crean, sorry, if we can
No,
have
Jason's
it's supposed to be a casual
no,
conversation, so
I hear Dr. Crean from my students all the time. It's like Jason's fine. Uh,
okay, okay,
yeah,
okay.
we'll keep you posted. New product development always gets posted on Team Thrive first. I kind of give all our Team Thrive members sneak peeks at stuff. So yeah, we'll definitely communicate that to everybody.
And it's glad to hear you're excited about it because here and there I've heard people asking about this. Even in the AAV veterinary presentation, people said, "Is there a commercial product available?" I'm like, "We're working on it." So it's coming, and
And
sooner rather than later.
it's great that there's vets who are interested in empowering their clients, right? Their people to get things like this going for their birds.
Absolutely.
For too long, vets are like, just feed this and they'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it's like,
And geophagy has been discouraged in particular for quite some time. And in our podcast, we can go over why that is and why this product would be different compared
yeah.
to the things that people have brought up in the past as being a problem with like grit and that kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
a whole different
Yeah.
list of benefits and different yeah.
Mhm. Agreed. So thank you. Um, Thank you, Heather. That's very kind. We appreciate
Yeah.
you. Stefania, thank you for the kind words. You inspire us too.
Always.
Always looking for better, always looking for, improving the life of your birds. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Sarah. We're looking forward to future podcasts. So yeah, just watch on Team Thrive. When this gets posted to YouTube, I will share it on Team Thrive for everybody to see, and then you can share it with everyone that you like. We'd really like to generate a lot of interest around this um, to get people excited about doing better for their birds. So we really appreciate all of you. We appreciate everybody watching this. Please like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Hopefully in about a month.